All right, gather round, because let me tell you a tale of terror from the foggy, grimy streets of Victorian England. Now, you think you know vampires, right? You think of Dracula. But long before the Count, another creature of the night was stalking the pages of popular fiction. And this one, he wasn't born in some fancy castle. No, he was born in the clanking gears of London's printing presses. This is the wild story of Sir Francis Varney, the original gentleman vampire.
So, picture this. It's a dark and stormy night, of course. A young woman, Flora Bannerworth, is sound asleep in her bed. All of a sudden, this grotesque figure with burning eyes and these long, horrible nails smashes through her window, and it attacks. Her family rushes in, they fight it off, and it escapes into the night. But one of the men, he actually gets his hands on it for a second, and when he comes back, his voice trembling, he says this. And with those words, we are plunged into one of the craziest, bloodiest stories ever put to paper.
Okay, so here's our game plan for digging into this absolute masterpiece of mayhem. First, we're going to look at the cheap fiction that unleashed this monster. Then, we'll meet the man, the myth, the vampire himself, Sir Francis Varney. We'll dive into his super conflicted soul, jump on the roller coaster of pure chaos he creates, and finally see how he basically laid out the red carpet for the most famous vampire of all time.
So how did a story like this even get to the masses? Well, it wasn't in some fancy leather-bound book you'd find in a library. Oh no, this was delivered every single week on cheap, flimsy paper, and it cost just 1 penny. This was a machine, you guys, a machine built for one purpose, to generate thrills and pull coins right out of the pockets of the working class.
They had a name for them, penny dreadfuls, and that's exactly what they were. For 1 single penny, you got the next chapter in some huge, sprawling, sensational story. The best way to think about it is like this. This was the 19th century's version of a binge-worthy streaming show. It dropped one wild, cliffhanger-filled episode at a time. This was not high art, not by a long shot. This was mass entertainment at its most raw and visceral. The formula for a successful penny dreadful? It was simple, and honestly, kind of brutal. First, you needed a plot that was completely bonkers, just over the top. You needed tons of gore and shocking details. You needed a mysterious, probably supernatural villain. But the most important ingredient, the secret sauce, was that every single chapter had to end on an absolutely maddening cliffhanger. You had to make it impossible for readers not to come back next week, penny in hand. It was a brilliant and totally ruthless business model.
And the undisputed heavyweight champion, the superstar of the penny dreadful horror scene, was Sir Francis Varney. See, he wasn't just some shambling ghoul crawling out of a grave. He was an aristocrat. And for the super class-conscious Victorians, that made his monstrous nature all the more terrifying. This is Varney at his most terrifyingly direct. He's speaking to Flora, our heroine, and he's just laying out his unholy ambition right there on the table. He wants her family's estate, and he makes it crystal clear that there is absolutely no line he won't cross to get it. He is a predator, plain and simple, just one hiding behind a fancy title.
Ah, but here's where he gets truly dangerous. Just when you think he's a simple brute, you get this. He was eloquent. He was charming. 1 minute he's the snarling beast with blood on his lips, and the next, he's a silver-tongued gentleman with a voice like music. He could literally terrify you and mesmerize you in the exact same breath. That's a terrifying combination.
But you know what? The contradictions weren't just for his victims to deal with. The real war, the biggest battle, was being fought inside Varney's own mind. He wasn't some creature of pure evil who just loved being a monster. No, he was something way more complex, and in a weird way, something that feels almost modern.
Just listen to that. That's the vampire's inner monologue. He is filled with self-loathing. He knows he's a curse, he knows he's a monster, and it tortures him. He literally shudders at himself. For one of the very first times in fiction, we get a truly sympathetic monster, a villain who is also his own victim. It's heartbreaking, really.
And this constant battle just defines his entire existence. So on one hand, yeah, he's a monstrous predator who terrorizes innocent families. But on the other hand, he lives by this bizarre, almost chivalrous code of honor. He'll insist on a fair duel. He'll actually show moments of deep, genuine remorse for what he's done. He's this whirlwind of monstrous appetite and aristocratic honor, and you truly never know which version of Varney you're going to get.
Now, this story isn't some quiet, moody, gothic tale set in a dusty castle. Oh no, it is an absolute explosion of public hysteria.
Varney's mere presence ignites the entire countryside into a frenzy of mob violence. So the story becomes just as much about the terrified, torch-wielding public as it is about the vampire himself.
The plot just follows this relentless, dizzying pattern. It goes like this. Varney attacks. Word gets out. An enraged mob forms. They go and burn his house down, they dig up graveyards looking for his coffin, and then, right when they think they have him cornered, poof, he escapes. And then, a few chapters later, the whole bloody cycle starts all over again, and each time it gets even more frantic than the last. It's exhausting just thinking about it.
And that is the voice of the mob. It's a cry of pure panic and rage. They are not interested in understanding this thing, they want blood. They want to tear the monster from his hiding place and destroy him, plain and simple. This raw public fury is the engine that drives its entire story, turning whole towns into absolute war zones. So after 232 chapters of bloodshed and self-loathing and riots, where does Varney leave us? Well, he leaves us with the blueprint. The actual blueprint for pretty much every vampire that would ever follow, creating the tropes that a much more famous count would later perfect.
I mean, when you put them side by side, the legacy is totally clear. Varney was the prototype. He was the messy, emotional, conflicted monster for the working masses. Dracula, coming 50 years later, is the refined version. He's the cold, calculating aristocratic nightmare that came out of serious Gothic literature. It's like this. Varney was the chaotic, raw, passionate garage band, and Dracula was the polished stadium rock act that took that sound and made it mainstream.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating question, doesn't it? Varney was the people's vampire. He was wild, he was remorseful, he was strangely relatable. Dracula was the detached, terrifying elite. And for over a century, Dracula has been our go-to icon of the undead. But think about our modern vampires. They're all brooding, they're all conflicted, they're all looking for redemption. So are we actually seeing a return to that messy, emotional, and very human monster that first sank his teeth into the public's imagination, all for the price of a penny? Something to think about.